Hello, welcome to today's episode of Inspireland. My guest today is Stephen Petrow. He's an award-winning journalist and author, and he's best known for his exquisite writing in The Washington Post, The New York Times, and US Today. When I read his book, The Joy You Make, Find the Silver Linings Even on Your Darkest Days, I knew I had to talk to him. I was gripped by the book from start to finish. And he shares in it a very dark and very personal time of his life, which includes, in a very short space of time, the death of both of his parents, the breakup of his marriage, and his sister's cancer diagnosis. After a lot of work through this time, he came to the conclusion that it's possible to find joy even in those challenging moments, including grief as well. I've read a lot of books on joy, and a lot of them, to be totally honest with you, are just very unrealistic because they portray this idea that you can live a life full of joy in every moment and everything's wonderful. I actually think that's damaging because I think that sets an unrealistic and impossible standard. Stephen, on the other hand, is real. He's not creating a fluffy world of promises that will actually make you feel worse about yourself. He's saying that joy can be found in any moment if you choose to be open to it. I've tried his teachings in the book and they work. How do you do all of that? How do you find joy in any moment? How do you be open to it? He's about to explain. Firstly, Stephen, I want to thank you for writing this book and, from what I can say, putting a little bit more joy out into the world. So firstly, thank you for that. And I also thank you as well for the amount of research you did on this book, because it's very evident, because this book isn't just your words. It's clearly an extensive collection of thoughts, of studies, of wisdom, from many other sources. So I really appreciate the research you've done in this as well to bring that to us as readers. I wanted to ask you firstly, in learning about joy through that research and then from within when you were writing the book, what most surprised you about joy?
Well, that is a very good question, and I have to admit that I might have thought I knew something about joy before I started this book, but as it turned out, I knew very little. And one of the important things that I came to realize early on in my research was that we tend to think of joy as sort of the big bang holidays or events, whether it's New Year's Eve, I suppose over in the UK it would be Guy Fawkes Day, anniversaries, birthdays, weddings, this sort of ecstasy almost. And that is one kind of joy, but that is one kind of joy. As I came to read and talk to scholars and researchers, there's really a whole range of joys that we can experience, but we don't always register them as joy. And many of them are quieter ones. One of my favorites is serene joy, which can be the joy that you take from or that you make when reading a book or being out on a nature trail or finding a moment of quiet and solace washing the dishes. So that's another kind of joy that I didn't really understand. And one of the more important distinctions is joys that we experience in a group versus joys that we experience being alone. And we are much more likely to have a joyful experience when we're with other people. And the contemporary example that I like to give is, if you are at a Taylor Swift concert, that energy that happens there between artist and other performers and the audience is this collective effervescence, as it's referred to. And that kind of lifts all of us and also brings us together. And So before I ramble on too much more, this notion of connection and togetherness is also intrinsic to joy, and I wasn't so familiar with that aspect either.
Mm. Would it be fair to say that you were skeptical about joy before doing the book?
Well, it's certainly fair to say that I was known as a curmudgeon, as the sort of typical half glass full kind of guy. I sort of tended to see the world through that prism. And then, I guess it's about 7 years ago now, I had a really, really crappy year. If I could pronounce, you can help me with this. You remember when the late Queen had her terrible year?
Mm.
How do you pronounce that in UK talk?
Is it the Annus Horribilis?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's what I was trying to say. Thank
yeah.
you. See, it's good to have a BBC reader. I had my own version of that, and that it started off in January of that year with my mom dying. In April, my dad died. In between, my husband of 13 years left, and then my sister was diagnosed with ovarian cancer late that year, and that's not a good cancer.
Mm.
Um, So I felt that the dark clouds were sitting right on top of me, and were paralyzing in a certain way, to mix the metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's around the time when I said, I need to begin to find a path out of this darkness,
Mm-hmm.
and the breadcrumbs of joy became, and the breadcrumbs of joy became my pathway towards the light. It did not start with so much of an intention. It later became an intention, but I began taking photographs with my little iPhone, my antiquated iPhone. So it's not like it was a fantastic version of, it's certainly no 16, let me tell you that. Um, and it was every day my goal was to find something that brought me joy.
Mm.
And some of them were very, sort of stereotypical, beautiful sunrise or a flower or um, walk in nature, a painting. And
Mm-hmm.
I began posting them on Instagram with the tags joy, joyful, gratitude, and
Mm.
beauty is everywhere. And people began to like them. And I was like, oh, that's great. People are liking my photographs. I was getting the dopamine hit. And I thought it was about that. And then I'd say maybe a month later, I noticed that several people had begun to post their own
Mm-hmm.
photos with the same set of hashtags. And at that point, I realized that it was the sharing both ways, my sharing with my followers and them sharing with theirs, that was really the connection and was really so much more important and powerful than the click.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that kind of helped me to understand that this was still in the middle of the pandemic, or the early part of the pandemic, that I had been devoid of much connection, as had many people during that time. And so this began a way back, a way to feel connected and to share and to become part of that collective. Um, so those were the early days.
Mm. How do you how do you do that in challenging times? Because when you say there about the Taylor Swift concert, it's a
Hmm.
chance for so many people to forget about their troubles, forget about their worries for a few hours. When you go for that nature walk, again, you're surrounded by beauty, and it's easier to find joy in those moments. But when you talked particularly about grief in your book, and you write
Hmm.
joy and sorrow, celebration and grief, I wondered, how do we simultaneously hold such diametrically opposed emotions? So what have you come to learn about living in a
Hmm.
space at the exact time that holds grief and joy?
Yes, that was really the central conundrum, the central challenge, Rory, and I appreciate you highlighting that. And I, at the beginning of my search, I would have, and I know that I thought it was really impossible to hold both emotions strongly and simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
The I'll say the curious path that I went down was, so my sister had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer, as I mentioned, which is, for someone who has an advanced form of it, it's almost always fatal. And she lived for 5.5 years. She passed about a year and a half ago. And that was an opportunity for me to begin to understand how there could be joy and and grief and loss at the same time. And what happened was I became very much more intentional about my relationship both with my sister and my entire family, as did my other family members. We began spending more time together, doing things, you know, cooking, playing games. Everyone was always accusing everybody of cheating. It's kind of a family it's kind of a family trait. And since I'm the one who has the microphone, I'm going to say I was not the one cheating.
Now's your chance, Stephen.
I know. Um, but what happened was, we lived with her illness. We supported her. We certainly felt her pain, but we also forged a much deeper relationship, both with Julie and between the rest of us. And in a sense, this is a really deep emotional connection that ties back to what I was talking about earlier about joy, but also this vulnerability. And vulnerability is another component of preparing yourself to find joy in the world and to rediscover it in yourself. And so I remember, so Julie was my baby sister, and I was trying to be the older brother and be helpful and to be strong, so to speak. And I cried a lot, but I never had cried with her. And then one day, I'd say probably about a year and a half before she died, I was just a mess. And I was on the phone with her, and I was weeping. And she said, "Well, that's okay. I'm having a good day." But my exposure of the pain I was going through opened us up even to a deeper level, and a deeper level of trust and communication and connection. And that happened in various ways with all of our family. And so when she died, the whole family was in the house with her. We had spent the night together in a different part of the house. And it sounds, certainly for the curmudgeon who saw life half full, this was the worst experience, and yet maybe the most beautiful experience, to go through that together and to help her, let go. That's a more extreme case than we often experience, and I hope most people don't have to experience it to that level, but we can find, in other kinds of hardship, whether it's a breakup, whether it's a financial problem, the ways that we can reach out to others and find these moments of connection and joy and vulnerability help us cope and live with and live through those challenging times. And that's really when we need them the most, Rory, in a sense.
Yeah, it really is. And those are the moments where you try the hardest to look for those moments of joy, but sometimes in those moments when you experience the joy through and during the challenging times, there's a feeling sometimes of guilt that I shouldn't be feeling this because, in your case, Julie is going through this, or this is a challenging time for our family. So you feel guilty for feeling guilt, and joy isn't something we're supposed to feel during these moments, is what we're taught. What has been your experience of living in a space of grief and guilt?
Very well said. And I I used my social media feeds quite a bit during her illness to talk about all of the issues that I eventually wrote about in the book. And so I talked about that conflict. I talked about that guilt. And the primary reason, or there were two reasons I was posting. The first was, as a writer in whatever form, my words help me to process my feelings. And so this book, in a sense, is sort of the end product of all that processing. But in the day to day, posting on Instagram and elsewhere helped me in the moment process some of those conflicts. And so I did talk about both. I did talk about the guilt of experience what I thought was joy. When we went away for a vacation as a family, and we had a really fun time, and we had canoe races and so on and so forth. But that cloud was still there, but I thought it important for both me to experience the joy, but then also the reason to talk about it was to help others explain that it can happen, it does happen, and you know you don't need to feel guilty about that. This is it's almost like this is a life preserver that you need in those troubled times. And so I try to use myself as a human guinea pig in many ways in my work. There's another there's a chapter where I talk about the onset of a shoplifting problem for me, and that brought a certain level of embarrassment because I thought overall I was processing my feelings around loss, fairly well, and I had a therapist, and I was writing and talking, and then I had been visiting Julie at the hospital in New York, and she was in a clinical trial that was resulting in a tremendous number of side effects that were very painful to her and were very painful to observe. And I went down to the gift shop to get some coffee and a newspaper. And there was nobody there. And I waited a little bit. And then I just developed this fury, this sort of massive fury at the whole world, but specifically at the hospital because they were not curing this problem. And this is not to say that she didn't have very good care, but in that moment I was just full of rage. And so I took my cup of coffee and I took that newspaper, and I did that for 3 days in a row. And I got a little more emboldened. I didn't feel good about it, but when I wrote about it, I thought it was important, to share that we can't always control our emotions, and there's this spillage from time to time. Now, I did make restitution. I did acknowledge what I did, but what came out of that, and I wrote about it first in the Washington Post, was so many other people wrote in saying, they had done the same thing under similar type of circumstances, which is to say extraordinary circumstances. But it made me feel like less of a freak out in a sense. And I think, again, we could have more empathy and kindness for each other when we understood the context. So these are some of the ways, that I expose myself in the book. And many of my friends who know me quite well are, they've been kind of shocked by some of these, I have to admit.
Why did you choose to be so vulnerable?
Because I think that we wear so many masks. We have constructed so much armor to protect ourselves these days. And I feel like we will be able to see each other better, hear each other better, and acknowledge each other better if we can take down some of that. So I think if we can shed those skins and be the real, vulnerable, sometimes scared, sometimes ecstatic, wonderful, not wonderful people, we will be able to recognize each other and recognize that aspect of ourselves too.
How does that feel for you now? Because from your book I sense that you are a I would say, former perfectionist. How does it feel?
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Rory, it's a sliding scale.
It's not black and white.
No,
What impact has being vulnerable had on your life, your well-being? How does that feel now?
It has had the impact that I was hoping that it would, which is to say, I have felt closer to many more people, and I think they closer to me. And what's really been interesting, Rory, is I've been on book tour here, and so when I'm actually physically in a room with a group of people talking about these things and making eye contact, and there's body language on both sides, and then the last half or third of the hour is usually questions and comments from the audience. People are responding in a similar manner, on a similar level, with this same kind of openness and exposure. And I remember the very first event in Chapel Hill here in North Carolina. A woman had recently lost her husband, and she acknowledged that and that grief, and was really, sunk in it. And I knew some of the other people who were in the room who had just gone through other losses of a similar magnitude. And I asked if anyone else wanted to speak to their own feelings about that. And several people then stood up and did, and they all felt, I know they felt connected in a surprising way, as did many others in the room who did not have, deaths in their families, but had, been through other things recently. So, I'm trying to model a type of behavior, and I'm going to be the first to say it is sometimes challenging.
Mm-hmm.
As a writer, it's much easier for me to sit at my laptop and expose myself, so to speak, emotionally, than to do so in a room. And that's part of the practice that I'm engaged in now with this book and in talking about it. And, and this is a good example too, in talking with you about it and having, your listeners hear this story.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned a word there about openness and being open. And in the book you write, joy is always present in the silver lining, in the resiliency, in our memories, in the connection to those who share your grief when it comes. It's in the everyday world, on good days as well as bad ones. You only have to look for it, be confident that it's there, and be open to it when you find it. What does that mean, to be open to joy?
So there is a little bit of a shift of mindset that I underwent that I think is part of this process. And I'll answer that question a couple of different ways. So I am sitting here, and for those who are listening, there's no video, but I'm wearing a ring that my sister made for me before she died. And in the ring are 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 sapphires. And those sapphires were in earrings that she wore. And I have a ring like this, and then 2 of my nieces have jewelry that's also made from the same earrings that Julie had. I can look at this every day on my hand, and sometimes the day is looking dark, and think back to specific happy times with Julie, to when I remember her wearing those earrings, which was usually some kind of exuberant or fun event. There's a time traveling aspect to an artifact like this. The same thing can happen, in cooking a recipe. I have some of my mother's old recipes, and once in a while I will cook them, and again get transported back to family times that were happy, that were nourishing. And in my mom's case, she was a terrible cook, and she tried so hard. But many of our best memories of her in the kitchen were the failures. But
Stephen.
Mom, you know I love you. They passed also. she would she would be happy to know at her memorial service. She was always referred to as shake and bake, and I don't know that you have shake and bake in the UK.
Uh-huh.
So that that was really her approach to creating meals: shake and bake, tater tots, and rice and roti, which all prepackaged foods, but made with love. Um, so it's in it. That's one of the ways we can look to the past when we don't feel that it's here today. But then there's some practices also that came from my research, and one of them is keeping a gratitude journal.
Mm.
And it might sound like a fancy word. Basically, it could be a pad of paper or scraps of paper, where at the end of every day, you write down what you're grateful for. And I remember when I read that, I thought, please. And then the science said if you do this for 3 weeks straight, 21 days, you will feel more joy. And I was like, okay, so that was the skeptic coming to that. Well, I did, and I thought, well, I'm not even going to have things to be grateful for because of sort of my nature. And it wasn't as though you had to be grateful for solving climate change, which would be tremendous. But it was. I remember in looking back at them. Sometimes we'd be, swimming in a lake, going on a walk with a friend. Many of them had to do with other people and doing things together. I remember having a delicious bowl of ice cream. They were small joys, and but they were consistent. And when you go to sleep, you do this before you go to bed. You go to sleep with that frame of mind. I am thankful for 1, 2, and 3. You wake up slightly different than if you went to sleep holding a grudge, being angry about something that happened during the day, or focusing on the dark. And so it's now 7 years later. I am still doing that because I still find that that shift in how I see the world to be important and sustaining. And this is not just me saying that. There've really been some substantial studies that show this as well. So there are various aspects of a practice, but it's a very accessible practice for everybody.
Do you still do a gratitude journal now today?
I do, and I am sure because so I am hearing your accent. And I realize that I have an accent to you, but I'm like loving your accent. That is, that is bringing a smile to my face. There's a beautiful lilt in how I hear you use the language, and so that will likely be one of the 3 things. And I took my dog for a walk earlier, and I was running late, and I was so glad that he did number 2 quickly so that I could be here on time. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important as well to really get this across, because what I learned from your book is I read so many books in the whatever arena you want to call them, self-help, self-improvement, whatever. And some of them can feel and be woo-woo, if that's the right word. Yours is coming from a practical place, and also previously a skeptical place, which is why I enjoyed yours so much, because of how much you have changed as a person through this process and what it's done for your life. And to give an example of that is when I read your book, I have a few days in between before finishing to doing the interview, and it gives my mind time to think about questions I might like to ask you. And I was in the shower a couple of days ago, and I was thinking, I want to know this from him, I want to know this from him, I want to know this from him. And my mind was racing with questions. And one of them, when I stepped out of the shower, was, how do we all find joy? Can we find it right here, right now? And I wondered what your answer would be to that. And when I thought of that, I stopped and I tried it. And I heard my husband playing the guitar downstairs. and his voice and the music was carrying itself upstairs to me. And I didn't even realize that for the past 5 minutes. And it was only when I was open to finding joy and allowing it in that I was able to receive it.
That's a perfect example. That's beautiful. And even in the shower, sometimes I'm like rushing. Part of this is we rush through our days, we rush through our lives. Shower is a perfect example. There are days when I remember to, okay, I'm under this water. I'm experiencing this warmth. There's a freedom. There is a chapter called "The Joy of Blue," which is about the healing impact of water overall, and we tend to associate that with the ocean or a sea or a lake, but it's also the bathtub or the shower stall. It is the water.
It's interesting as well because something I've learned through your book is the search for joy isn't the same as the search for happiness. They're two very different things, and you're very, very clear about that in the book as well. What have you come to know is the difference between joy and happiness?
Well, so that was one of my confusions at the beginning of my search. I would say in the United States, we often use happiness and joy as synonyms, interchangeable. And the happiness, there's a happiness industrial complex in this country. There are many podcasts about it. There are many books. There's 7 ways to find happiness, 30 minutes to find happiness. It's been highly monetized as well. But as I looked at the scholarly articles, I saw that there was actually a difference in how researchers looked at them and then how people experienced them. And the way I have explained it to American audiences, you'll have to help me translate a little bit. So I say that happiness is like a Twinkie. And so a Twinkie is it's a prepackaged little cake that has every artificial everything in it, and it has a cream center. It's completely unhealthy. It's loaded with fat and sugar. I love them. Most people have loved them at some point. So I'm sure there's some equivalent of that. I hope this is not part of like what America has exported. and so happiness is like that Twinkie. You get this huge sugar rush. You get this high, and then you have this crash because it's not sustainable. Joy is sort of a steady state friend, and I describe it as like the hearty whole wheat muffin. It has it fills you, it satiates you for a longer period of time. You don't get the same bump, but you don't get the crash. And so joy is a state of being rather than a reaction to something in the world. That's the first level. But the second level, I think, is even more important, which is happiness is about an individual. I just had that Twinkie. I'm happy. I got a promotion. That's making me happy. I'm going on a vacation. Joy is, again, about the intersection of you and me and the we. And it's really the we that defines joy. You can't really have joy in a solitary way. There are some, I do talk about some cases, solitude being one of them, but generally it is a shared emotion, a shared feeling. And that is really the key that differentiates it from happiness.
And I think the search as well for trying to achieve something which simply isn't possible, which is happiness all the time, or taking your book into consideration, joy all the time. I want to live with joy in my life all the time, which you write is simply not possible.
It's both not possible, and I am going to defend this. I don't think it would be a good thing or a healthy thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the reason is, how can we really understand joy if we don't experience the other range of emotions?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if everything were that Twinkie, well, first of all, we'd be diabetic. But but second of all, we wouldn't have any way to contrast it with what we don't know.
Mm.
And I've spent some time in northern Finland, in both in the summer and in the winter. So, as you know, in the summer, it's light pretty much 24/7, and in the winter it's dark for the same amount of time. It's really hard to appreciate light and dark when you don't know its inverse,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just there. It's just there all the time. We take it for granted. So um, nobody should feel that they need to experience it all the time, because I think that would also dilute it
Mm.
and give it less of its power and impact over us.
Mm. But the counter to that is that the question of, do you believe that everyone has the ability to find joy and access it at any time?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
but
Why?
not every time. I went on a retreat, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, and it was called Finding Your Essence.
Mm-hmm.
And these were people who were midlife, who were trying to navigate all sorts of changes, whether it was divorce, as it was in my case, or illness or death, or work transitions. And the leader was talking to us about refinding your essence. And I was like, excuse me, I don't even know what that means. My essence, is that like a perfume? I mean, I was my full skeptic was on display in this
Uh-huh.
group also, because um, and then I remembered, and I have this photo with me in the house. It's of me as a 10-year-old boy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not one of the, it's a photograph my parents had done, but this was an outtake, so it wasn't the one that got framed. And in this one, I'm sticking my tongue out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, I'm clearly laughing. My eyes are lit up. And I looked at that photo again and I said, okay, now I get it. I see my essence in that young boy. And also, I see that how life has managed over time to dim that essence, but not to extinguish that essence.
Mm-hmm.
And so then this workshop became much more useful to me when I sort of understood my starting place,
Mm.
and sort of who is inside of us that that has been hurt, that has been damaged, that we have felt we need to protect or not show, and you know, so in that way, that exists in all of us,
Mm-hmm.
and then when we sort of go through this process of beginning to have that connection, it does become much easier to find joy
Mm.
um, in a frequent way, because the child who I was looking at, was living in a world of joy until various things happened to him,
Mm-hmm.
and he needed to protect himself.
Mm. So when you acknowledge joy, when you're open to it, when you're willing to find it, when you do find it, what impact does that have on you and your true essence? Does it allow that little Stephen, the true essence of Stephen, to come out?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me give you the answer from my brain before my heart.
Mm.
So, finding joy and living with joy, so many health experts have shown the health benefits, physical health and mental health. Things from um, lower blood pressure, less stress, less frequency of anxiety and depression. I could give you a laundry list of uh, beneficial results from living in a joyful state. So that's the brain answer. Um, And one of my struggles, my whole life has actually been to push down from my brain into my heart. And so part of this book is that exploration too. And then when I do that, when you go into a state of feeling joy, it's kind of like there's a long thread to that is connective tissue. And here I'm being metaphoric rather than literal. And it takes me back to the 10-year-old boy. And others in that group, they have their own touchstones. And as I've talked to others, on book tour, this has become apparent as well.
That's why I love talking to people like you, because like I said earlier, it's very easy to get into and I haven't found the right word to replace woo woo yet, because there is parts of me that is a very practical person. I like to be very realistic about things, and I like to counter things by saying, but what would happen if this external factor shows up in life? How are you supposed to do it then? Because it's all well and good practicing the good things, finding joy when life is a little bit easier. But which is the reason why I enjoyed your book so much, is because it's not about finding joy when you are already in a joyful state, but it's about finding joy in the challenging times as well. And something that I'm being vulnerable and very open now about in this conversation is not something that I've discussed, but it is about going down to that true essence of yourself and finding that meaning and purpose of your life, which is a very big question. And it's one that you asked in the book, and you said, I'm reminded of the popular adage, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The pure purpose of life is to give it away. So for someone, and I'm talking about me, who has had layers put on them by others and myself that has distracted me from my true meaning and purpose of life, and I'm still honing in on exactly what that is. How have you been able to find your meaning and purpose of life?
I'm just thinking about how I want to answer that. And it was about, to answer your question, there's a chapter called The Joy of Authenticity, which is being real, being yourself, finding yourself. And I talk about that photograph that we talked about earlier. And I write, I know this boy is me, but I do not recognize him. There's an easiness, a spontaneity, and authenticity defining him. And then I talk about sort of a moment of serendipity. This is about 10 years ago, and I was at a what used to be called a writer's colony, now a residency program where writers are given the gift of time and space to do their work. And I had a little mail slot, and somebody left me a book. And that happens from time to time. Though this book appeared with no notes, so I didn't really know who it was from or why it was left for me. And it was a novel called The Last First Day. It's by a woman named Carrie Brown, who has since then become a friend, but she was unknown to me at that time. And the book jacket says it's the story of a woman's life in its twilight as she looks back on a harrowing childhood and on the unaccountable love and happiness that emerged from it. But the way the story plays out, the protagonist, who's named Ruth, says at one point, if I can't ever tell anyone the true story of my life, then no one will ever know me. And so that really struck me because I felt at the point that I read that in my life, I had not been telling the true story of my life, sometimes not even to myself, much less to others. And, that fictional character inspired me to be more open and to learn more about, my own past. I went back into therapy and I took some of those practices and learnings into the world. And one of the earlier things that I did was understand better what it had meant to me to be molested as a young child, and then to be able to talk about that and to write about that. And even as we're talking now, that it does not come easily, but it's one of those secrets, and secrets are never healthy. And in the years that I have written and talked about it intermittently, to be sure, um, it has opened me up, and it has most definitely helped others to acknowledge whatever their pains are, and scary things.
And has life then become somewhat easier living in your truth?
Much easier, so much easier.
In what ways?
There's much less like living in a shadow, living with a secret, having something so heavy in your heart that it feels like it's blackening your heart or your soul. I've let the light in, and the light, like joy, is so affirming. And then I think, I'm not going to use myself as the example here, but I think, when we know people who have light, they radiate that light. And then that is how it is shared. And there's very much a viral nature to joy. We don't often understand that or think about that, but there is. We think about the viral nature of the bad things, the evil things, bullying, violence, bad words. It's equally true for all of the positive emotions as well.
And now, having learnt so much about joy and learning so much about yourself during that process, and also from what I can hear from learning about yourself through life experiences, in the book you write, I started this book wondering what business I had, writing about how to find joy in daily life, even during hard times. I had plenty of reasons: death, divorce, illness, to think I was not only the wrong person, but that I didn't even deserve joy. Do you now see that you are the right person, and do you feel that you deserve joy?
I don't want to be one of these people that ends the story with, and they lived happily ever after. Largely, the answer is yes. But life goes on. Life throws new curveballs. It's a practice, and it's really an approach to living and to living each day. So overall, absolutely, I feel that I deserve it, but not every single day, because I still have shadows, and I don't want to. I think it's sometimes irresponsible when when people have a platform, to make it seem to others, well, you can reach a state of perfection. And as we've talked about it in a joking way, a state of perfection should not be the goal. A state of imperfection and loving your imperfect self should be the goal. That's my answer.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for being so open. And thank you for your book.
Well, thank you too, Rory. I hadn't known what to expect, and I really I appreciate your sensitivity, and I can feel your authenticity. It's well, thank you.
Yeah.
All the best to you, especially with the podcast.